O'clock. Shall we begin?
We shall. 3 o'clock on the East Coast.
Right, 12 o'clock on the real coast. No, kidding. Oh, it's good to see you. It's good to be able to smile after a long week.
A long week.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine that the world would have started to look more like Parable of the Sower since our last webinar, but this is where we find ourselves.
Right. Fires and all.
Fires and all, although, hopefully some cleansing comes in the wake, but there's a lot of violence and anyway, a lot to talk about today. So,
well, let Dr. Coleman get started, the other Dr. Coleman.
Right.
Do some intros.
Yes. I wish that we could say that we were related, but we are not, though in spirit we are. So my name is Dr. Coleman, and I am very much grateful to be able to introduce our panelists for today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So today, we're going to be embarking on the fourth installment of Octavia Tried to Tell Us, a parable for today's pandemic. Today we'll have a discussion between Tananarive Due and Dr. Monica A. Coleman. Before we get started though, I thought it was be good to have a bit of a plan for our time together. To start, we'll begin with introductions. From there, we'll move on to a conversation between Dr. Coleman and Tananarive Due, and then we'll move into a section where our panelists will answer the questions that you've submitted to the webinar form. There are other ways that you can engage as well. One of the main ways would be using Twitter, particularly the hashtag Octavia Tried. If you want to submit responses or questions or join in the discussion there, it makes total sense, as that discussion has been going on since the first iteration of our webinar. So you'll be joining the conversation that has been running on for quite some time and contribute there. So without further ado, I want to start by introducing Tananarive Due. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She is married to author Stephen Barnes, with whom she collaborates on screenplays, and who also joined us for Octavia Tried 3. They live with their son, Jason, and 2 cats. You can reach Tananarive Due at Tananarive Due on Twitter. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Monica A. Coleman. Dr. Coleman is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She works at the intersections of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles and book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received a Silver Illumination Award in 2017. Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religion and sexuality, religious pluralism, churches and social media, mental health, and sexual and domestic violence. And you can find Dr. Coleman on Twitter at Monica A. Coleman. So without further ado, I'd like to transition into the conversation for Parable for Today's Pandemic.
All right. Well, where do we begin? I don't have to tell anyone here that this has been a very challenging time. I mean, we had the pandemic to begin with, and then all of the healthcare crises and disparities that lays bare. And now,
And the grief, right?
And the grief. Let's not forget about the grief. Yeah, and then on top of that, the same old in terms of policing and police shootings and the killing of George Floyd. And before that, Breonna Taylor. Let's not forget Breonna Taylor, who was literally in her bed when she was shot by police.
And before that,
And before that,
right. I mean, and before that, right.
And before that. And yeah, so a lot of feelings. I mean, I have a very close friend who's a law school dean who actually is planning to attend a protest this weekend. And it's exciting on the one hand, but it's so nervous making on the other hand, because we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So there's the health aspect, then there's the violence aspect, police violence. I've seen video after video after video of police instigating violence against protesters, which is pretty much the modus operandi at a lot of these protests, especially in New York. And yeah, I worry. So I guess I just want to first send out a message to those of you who are watching. If you are planning to go to a protest, and I understand why you would go, please, please, please be careful in terms of wearing a mask, social distancing in terms of the pandemic piece, and also avoiding arrests at all costs, or contact with the police at all costs. Because just as an aside, I would like to say that my late mother, Patricia Stevens Due, who was a civil rights activist, tear gassed in 1960, wore dark glasses for her entire adult life after that, because she had sensitivity to light after being exposed to the chemical weapon that is tear gas. So there are long-term ramifications to stand up safely. And if you're not going to a protest, there are other ways to contribute financially, masks, resources. So yes.
Yeah. I've seen some amazing things. People say, if you get arrested in this city, our firm will represent you pro bono.
Yes.
I think there's a way all of us can kind of plug in some way.
Absolutely. But
and the thing is, even before, the protests, right, of this week, we began with this theme. We talked about this last week, that no one is coming to save us, which has long been a reality.
True.
For us. I mean, it's so much worse than that. But especially in this time, the places where some parts of the community may find recourse or safety are not saving us, right? Not the government, not right, not social structures, right? There's no social safety net, as we learned in this country, which we knew, but it's just really been highlighted.
Sharp now, very sharp relief.
Right, that no one is coming. That the clouds are not opening up and sending something down as if there's somewhere to come from. And so we have to, we really have to save ourselves.
I used to joke early in our current administration that Hollywood had kind of lied to us for all these years about what would happen if we had some sort of a dire emergency in the White House. I can think of movie after movie where there was some hero, whether it was Harrison Ford or somebody swooping in, to make things right when they go so badly wrong. And of course, we've seen over the last 3.5 years that is not the way it works.
Nobody swooped in.
Yeah, so despite my concerns about what's happening with some of the protests, meaning are they infiltrated by anarchists who have a different agenda, or white supremacists who have a different agenda, or, are they being manipulated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do have concerns about it. But honestly, as a child of civil rights activists who grew up on marches and who helped my mother write that book, Freedom in the Family, about their history with civil rights, it feels like, yes, we need people to rise up and make their pain and their concerns known. But at the same time, protests don't fix things by themselves. So the next piece, of course, is moving forward. What does surviving and thriving look like within the framework of no one is coming to save us, right? So I think that's what we'll talk about today. You all obviously have some concerns and questions too.
And something I thought about that we didn't talk about when we talked earlier at Tananarive was how much we probably still need to mourn that no one's coming to save us, right? I mean, so many of us, whether it's through Hollywood, through religion, have been raised with savior tropes, right? Or told a narrative that worked for some members of the community that the government or certain entities or certain organizations will be the safety net, right? And or that will always have a certain something. And so I still think there's a way in which even, we need to name, right, that there is this sadness, this disappointment, right? That when you have hope, which we must have some hope to live, that it's the continual disappointment, the saying, why did I have hope? Why did I even think?
Yes, self-determination, like, why did I believe in this in the first place? Well, because we were raised with it. We've been propagandized with it through the mythology of the mythologies around the founding of the nation, and the ideals that we've sought to live up to, but have yet to really,
Right.
starting there.
The hero's journey, right? That there will be a hero, that there will
True.
be that kind of a savior. And so I think we still need to, in some ways let go of that. And for some of us, many of us even function in these little miniature ways as that in our families, and we can't. We can't be there the way we are used to. We'd like to, right? We can't hold things together the way we've held things together.
Yes.
And there's, before we regroup, which we'll talk about, I think we still need to say, this is hard. This is disappointing.
True.
I'm losing a major, way of understanding the world, or way of understanding the, my world even.
That's a really good point, Monica. And I think this speaks to a meditation that I was doing last night before I went to sleep on my Calm app, which has become a fixture in my life. But this idea that when we're feeling anxiety, when we're feeling grief, when we're feeling disappointment, on top of that, there's this self-judgment that we feel like we shouldn't be feeling this way, which only makes it worse to experience the feeling. So thank you for pointing out, we absolutely do need to honor that we're having these emotions, that these emotions are legitimate, that we were not dumb to believe that our institutions would respond better than they have,
would do what they said they would do.
Right. In retrospect, it seems dumb, but no, we've all, no matter how cynical we've been or dissatisfied we've been, I think a lot of us are experiencing at least some surprise at how ineffective those institutions have been in the face of such an obvious crisis. And it's a continually eye-opening experience, even though Octavia did try to tell us. But still, it is an eye-opening experience. And that grief, listen, it's real, and it manifests, in cases where there's been a distinct loss. I have a student at UCLA who just did a fantastic video via Zoom, by the way. The whole production is a narrative Zoom video about a loss in the family and coping with grief in this era when you cannot hold the funeral rites that, as difficult as those are a very important part of the mourning process for so many people.
And the healing process.
Speak to that, Monica. So there's that specific kind of grief, but also the idea that the world is burning, or the country is burning, or your city is burning, while what you knew as your life also feels like it's burning, is a very unique experience. And obviously it's only going to affect grief exponentially, so it's already bad to lose people or to be afraid of losing people. The separation you're talking about, Monica, my father lives in Florida, so for a long time I was thinking, even in the case of the most urgent emergency, I would not have been able to get on a plane. Whereas now I feel like maybe I could get on a plane under some very specific circumstances, but there's still anxiety with all those what if questions. And especially for those of us who have active imaginations, the what if scenarios can be grim. And I'll use one example. When we first had the uprising in Minneapolis, the night the police station was burning, there were reports on Twitter as I was trying to go to bed. I really was trying to pull myself away. Sometimes self-care is shutting off news and social media, but I was not heeding that lesson. I was paying close attention. And there were reports that the National Guard was shooting at people. And I didn't know what I was going to wake up to. I didn't know if I was going to wake up to, we had another Kent State in Minneapolis where there might be a dozen people shot by the National Guard. I didn't know. So because I have a very active imagination, I can see all those worst case scenarios, and they don't seem very far-fetched at the moment, which is difficult for imaginative people when the worst case scenario actually feels close enough to touch. So, yes.
And when Octavia Butler, when, we're reading, if you read Parable of Sower near the time that it came out, it didn't seem, it wasn't like we were living in that world. We could imagine it. And it seemed like a cautionary tale. Like, let's not screw up so we don't get this, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, there were pockets of places,
Right.
where you could feel that very distinct sense of I'm living this dystopia. But you're absolutely right. That was not the norm for many of us as readers. It was absolutely read as a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
And it is very jarring to see it coming more and more to life in more and more specific ways because of the fire. Arson and fire are a major destructive force in Parable of the Sower.
And I think, Lauren is like our kids, right? Like, Lauren, she's not like, we're the adults in the story. And she is, our teenagers, right? Our young people who are growing up in this and are saying, what I'm inheriting is, is BS. Like, it's not going to work. Like, you keep doing the same thing in a new world and we're all going to die. That's really kind of, as you get this flip back on her journals right before we get to kind of the present time period in Parable. And she's just like, I'm looking at this, I'm listening to them, and I don't think this is going to work, people, right? And so she's really at that point. And she's like, well, I tried to talk to my dad about it. I tried to say something. I tried to do this. So I'm just going to write down the stuff I'm thinking and noticing and experiencing, right?
Right, absolutely. And in terms of that feeling of grief over how we're being forced to feel that we have to save ourselves, it's interesting that Lauren Oya Olamina is herself sort of a savior character, but Octavia intentionally created her as sort of, societally anyway, the least of us. She's Black, she's a woman, she's literally a child, right? So
with a handicap, right? With this condition that makes her weak in many ways.
Right. So while she sort of fits some images of what leadership is, another way she doesn't fit any images of what leadership has been traditionally in literature, which is, I think, Octavia's way of telling us that the we are Lauren Olamina, right? So
it recalls that June Jordan poem, right? We are the ones that we've been waiting for.
Absolutely. And it's, when you're tired, it's hard to feel saviory, okay? I had an editor reach out to me and say, could you write me an essay about, everything that's happening? And I said yes, but then I was sitting at my computer just feeling a little dazed and numb. And what's worse almost sometimes than feeling emotionally overwhelmed and wanting to put the covers over your head is when you just don't think you're feeling anything, that numbness. And I think a lot of us are kind of cycling in between feeling paralyzed, where you're just resonating with every tweet you see, everybody who's getting hit or harmed or arrested, and your heart is bleeding because you remember, in my case, I remember my first moment with public unrest after a police case went badly in Miami in 1980 with the death of Arthur McDuffie, and Miami burned for 3 days. And as a child, I was completely overwhelmed by both the fact that society seemed to be falling apart, but also that Black people didn't matter. That was my first Black Lives Matter moment, despite having been raised by civil rights activists. And we'd been to many protests over what seemed like little things, like smaller local protests, but it was never this thing where, in such an obvious case, where the police had beaten this man to death, then tried to cover it up, then gotten caught covering it up, finally gone to trial, but then they were not guilty. I was like, wait, what? How does that fit with liberty and justice for all? And it's this heartbreaking awakening, baptism by fire, that so many of us as Black people or as brown people or just as aware people have that confrontation with the difference between our expectations and reality. And that was really brought to sharp relief for me when I saw a story about a kid named Kedron Bryant, I want to say was his name, Kedron, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. He's 12 years old, and he recorded a song that went live called I Just Want to Live. And it reminded me, oh my gosh, when I was 14, I wrote a poem called I Want to Live because of these McDuffie, the McDuffie acquittal and then the unrest in Miami. And it's just this heartbreaking mirroring effect where it's not just that it's happening now, but that it's been happening
for so long.
And my mother would have had her first moment. My father had his first moment when his, where you realize we don't matter to the society. We have to save ourselves. And it's such an unfair burden because often on a political level, saving ourselves means also saving some other folks who are just hanging on to us, right? And our activism, who really, frankly, should be in the streets themselves. But there are allies in the streets, white allies who are not anarchists and who are not white supremacists, but who are allies and who are literally putting their bodies between the police and Black protesters using their skin privilege. Yeah. Although, frankly, one of the lessons from the 60s civil rights movement is that whites who ally themselves with Blacks then lose their status sometimes as white in the eyes of the police. So at a certain point, that privilege, once they other you, once the police decide you're other, that you're not us, you're them, then whites would also be subjected to violence. And we're in the 60s and will be now.
And it's this ability that we have to dehumanize. I mean, this is truly an American legacy, right? Both legal and, this is an ability of the heart, right? To not only to create an other, right? To decide like it's us and them, and whoever that them is, they're not human, right? They're not. I mean, of course, all societies create boundaries between people. That's how we have culture, right? Which is great. These are things that we do, and we do it a certain way, and other people who might be our neighbors do things a little bit differently. But the sense that, there is an other that's not human, that's what allows people, right, to do this. And it's a deep-seated belief that there are other people who are not as human as you are.
Right.
And that's a soul problem, it seems to me. Right. I mean, like you can't, as we have learned from the civil rights, you can't legislate that.
Right? No, you can try, but and this was something that was, as you readers will know, was a preoccupation of Octavia's, the tendency to create hierarchy. And I don't have to tell most of you that as Black people, and certainly as Black women, we are at the bottom of that hierarchy, and yet have so much responsibility on our shoulders to lead, and lead when we're tired, and lead when we don't get credit for leading, lead when we're not acknowledged for leading. So we have to lead because it's best for us and our children and our families and our loved ones. And then, we end up bringing a whole lot of other people with us and wish other people would do more. But, just to keep it honest, even, we talk about the 1960s. It's not like everybody was out there marching in the 1960s either.
Only in hindsight.
No, they really, and as my mother said, and for those of you who are organizers especially, do not be dispirited if you only have 2 or 3 core people in your group who come to the meetings on a regular basis, because that's how change begins, is with groups of 2 or 3 people. My mother and her sister, my aunt who's still living, Priscilla Krause, they lived in, they were at Florida A&M University, and they knocked on dormitory doors to try to get people to go to sit-ins. And, not that many people went, frankly. They were just a few, and they were arrested. But when they were arrested, then that sparked this outrage on the campus. So that within a very short period of time, 1,000 students were marching, and it had a whole different picture to it because of the actions of just 2 people. Or in your case, listener, it may be just 1 person. And maybe that change is not a march of 1,000, but it's a change right inside your own home. So let's speak to that piece where leadership begins. Would you agree with that, Monica? In the home?
Right. I mean, it a lot of the questions we got are, where do we start? What do we do? And you have to kind of, start where you are, especially if you can't go anywhere. Like many of us, I'm in a state that still has some closed borders, right? So, especially if you can't, or you don't think it's wise, or even rightly so, it's not safe because of the color of your skin. It's not safe to jog. It's not safe to lie in bed. I mean, so many things, right?
Yeah.
But we can start with our homes. And you talked about having an active imagination, right? And my daughter will often say, but mommy, I have an active imagination. And I'm like, but that's what makes you a good writer, right? This is what makes us creative people. And we can all reimagine, but then we can feel heartless. Not heartless, feel frustrated, I guess the better word. I can't find the word I'm thinking of. When it comes to implementing it, right? You just feel like you just keep hitting your head against a wall, or not being able to make the change we want. But we can start with our households, right? We can start with our families. How do we want to raise our children? How do we want to live our lives? How can we reorganize ourselves? I'll give one example. Might be, for some people many people of course have lost work. For some people have been like, you actually don't need me to go in for me to do my job, which might give a level of mobility of saying, I could move and live closer to my family or my relatives, once this is, we get a little breathing room.
Mm-hmm.
So that I have that kind of support. Or what would it mean if I haven't seen a relative for a long time for safety? If we, restructured our household into an intergenerational household.
Yes.
Right? How can we recreate that community? Because part of it is that we actually can't save ourselves by ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need community. And so much of the isolation has reminded us how much we need other people. You're not meant to just raise kids as one person or two people. You need a whole community to do it well.
Right.
Teachers and all these different things, and aunties and play aunties, and that we're not meant to do these things alone. So even how can we structure or restructure, right? Our families, our communities. Do we start living together in different ways? Do we start sharing space and sharing money in different ways? Like, okay, banks aren't coming to save us, but we can create susus, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can say who needs it and who has it, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think there are some ways in our in our families and in our networks, you might say.
I just saw a notice for a rent party on Twitter, that a community was putting together, like they did back in the day,
Right.
and different versions of that using technology. This is the Afrofuturism aspect, right?
Right.
To the future where we're having to repurpose technology to create community, intimacy, organization, all of these things that Zoom wasn't necessarily intended for, frankly.
Webinars about saving yourself.
Right. So, and I also want to back it up just a little bit to the personal piece. And I love this meditative pose of the woman, Lauren's image behind Monica, because this is not a joke. I don't know how many of you who are listening or watching have a meditative practice or have learned the importance of sleep. But one of the things that's happening in the midst of this pandemic is that our schedules are shifting. I see a lot of parents saying it's 11 o'clock and my children haven't worn pants in 3 days. And, okay, so there's a little bit of a chaotic element happening within our homes. And I think it's really, really important for us to acknowledge, like we can try to address that chaos. We can try to reassert rituals and patterns that will help mark the days so that everything's not melting into everything. And, but it also starts with that piece where we're rested. Do not underestimate that. I was really breaking my own personal rule by looking on social media after 11 o'clock at night, because I know that I get upset invariably by something I see on social media. In the beginning, it was, oh, here are the new symptoms of COVID-19. And then I would be convinced as I was going to sleep that I felt myself having those symptoms. So it's like, well, don't read any COVID stories. Don't read any of this stories. But really, it's don't read any upsetting stories right before you're going to sleep. It's, you don't have to wrestle with all those emotions all night. It's not healthy. It's not restful. I use the Calm app to listen to sleep stories and nature sounds and meditations, but there are a lot of other resources out there, some of them free, some of them you can teach yourself. The simplest is just, very often I'll just put my fingers together until I can feel my pulse. And then I count to 5, like 1 nostril 1, out 2, in 3, out 4, and then both nostrils 5, while I'm feeling my heartbeat in my fingers, but I'm also counting my breaths. And I have a visualization that I've adapted from something I heard on Calm, which was when you have thoughts that are troubling you, and instead of castigating yourself for those thoughts or self-criticism, let's just imagine them floating away. And for me, my thoughts float away like silver balloons, right? Doesn't mean I don't care. Doesn't mean it's not something I'm going to have to deal with tomorrow, but it's not something I have to deal with right now. And it's very, very important, not just when you're going to sleep, but at different points during the day, to just sit with the moment that is now. All of those worst case scenarios that you're worried will happen tonight after dark, or if you have children, adult children or teenage children who feel like they need to be at the protests and you are deathly afraid for them, which I can totally understand. When you're in those moments of anxiety, just sink in the moment of now. The worst has not happened right now, right? And the words of that poem by Audre Lorde, that she wrote when she was dying, but not today. Today is not the day, right? Not today. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Monica.
No, I really appreciate what you said about sleep, right? And, I have a friend who's on a, social media public weight loss journey. And one thing he said that was new information for me a couple of years ago when he said it was, you can eat right and exercise, but if you don't get enough sleep, you won't lose weight, right? Like your body literally just needs sleep to recover. And so often that's something we give up when we're working a lot, or it's something that we find hard to get in. And I am not a meditative kind of person. Like I think people should, but I am not, it's not my thing per se. I do deep breathing, but I wouldn't call what I do meditative. But I do think there is something really important about preserving some level of peace so you can sleep, right? So for me, it is, I don't do the social media images. Like I don't watch the videos. I don't want to see the pictures. I have a pretty good general idea of what happened. I'm like, don't text them to me, talk about it, but don't post it, because one, I know that my emotional bandwidth is like this right now, right? I still have a lot of grief with my mother passing and all the business that comes with that. It just actually creates more grief, right? At least it does for me. Going through her stuff, like there's not a lot of room here to add to that. And so I shelter myself from that, not from knowing about it or caring about it, but for me, like I know that's my boundary, right? Is that don't do the images, don't do the pictures, don't linger here. Like don't talk to me about it. We can talk about how we feel about it, but I don't want to talk about it because I know that I won't have, it'll be paralyzing, right? So one of my big things with sleep is I sleep best when I know that the things immediately around me are at peace, right? So people who've been in a relationship know that idea of never let the sun go down in your anger is just not realistic, right? Like there are many times where you just got to go to bed and you're still angry about something with a partner or someone you live with. But that doesn't work for me. Like whatever it is, I got to resolve it a little bit so I can rest, right? When my daughter was a baby, I heard every breath she took, right? When, it wasn't for quite a number of years. I was like, I think I'm gonna sleep again. I actually, hit that deeper level of sleep because you're checking on the baby. And so I think the sleep thing is really important. I think each one needs to figure out, by the way, I love the Calm app and those sleep stories, what it is, right? That can give you even those temporary kinds of peace, right? The deep breathing, anchor breaths, which my daughter learned because California in school. And so we do those together when we need to calm down, to get at the, to start off with, like step number 1, get enough sleep, because you can't save yourself if you're tired.
No, you can. And I want to mention, someone mentioned in the Q&A panel that there's an app called Liberate, which I have not heard of. which is supposed to be free. Calm is not free. So it centers meditation and talks by and for people of the African diaspora. So I will have to check this out as well. So, that sounds fantastic. Any tools, and I have been looking for more tools. I think the first lesson, let's talk about a theoretical go bag, not the literal go bag, is that we have to create better tools to equip us for the times that we're living in. The old tools that we were using last summer or last fall, or, even no matter how tumultuous our lives were not probably as tumultuous as they are now. So we've outgrown those tools. So we have to find new tools, right? So for some of you, this webinar is one of those tools. I know it is for me.
It is for
I'm
us.
glad that we can all share it together. More emphasis on meditation. I do morning walks now with affirmations, which is something I was not doing before. So the new me, I call it Tananarive Due 2.0, because I've had to really upgrade myself to meet these times.
Yeah, I do yoga now. I don't even like yoga, and I'm doing yoga every day.
Okay, well, I'm doing it once a week, at least, sometimes twice.
It really helps.
Yeah, because in yoga, for those of you who don't have a yoga practice, my husband, Stephen Barnes, has been a yogi for years and years and years. And for a while, he had me going with him to these hot yoga rooms at Bikram. I might have done it for a year that way, but I hated the hot room and I moved away from it. But then I've started to feel little creaks and aches and pains. And the last time it happened, just a few weeks ago, I was very tempted to call my chiropractor, but I couldn't make myself go into a chiropractor's office in the midst of a pandemic. So I went, I did, like you said, Monica, every day with the yoga, and day by day by day, the creak decreased and decreased and decreased until it went away. Just during the time since this pandemic started, I have had a mysterious shoulder pain. I've had a mysterious back pain, and that active imagination, of course, will tell me it's all kinds of horrible things. But thus far, my belief is that it's stress.
Yeah, well, stress lives in our bodies. Like, yes. Where is it going to go? Right. I mean, this is why, I think, and I'm not the only one there, Queen Afua writes on this beautifully, why Black women have so many, uterine challenges, and nobody knows why, as compared to maybe there's stress, maybe there's trauma, right? Different stresses live in different parts of our body. I once had a chiropractor who could tell where the stress, what kind of stress it was based on where it hurt. Like, oh, that's work stress, that's family stress, that's partner stress, right? If we have more aches, a lot of it's because, the feelings need somewhere to go if we don't give them somewhere to go. So yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, whether it's that walking thing or the yoga thing, or, I got my kid doing karate every day via Zoom with her dojo, because, we're having big feelings. That's the language I use with her, right? And I was like, I'm like, you having big feelings? I'm having big feelings too. And we have to get them out of our bodies, or they'll live in our bodies, right? And turn on us. And they're not always turning. Sometimes they're just saying, hey, notice me, right? Like, I'm just trying to get your attention so that you know that we're not operating at 100 here.
I think it's best when we can be as honest with our children too. I think back to election night, the biggest lie I ever told, telling my son, oh, everything's going to be okay. Because he was crying, and I was, I was crying inside, but I wanted to put up a good front. I don't think the goal ultimately is to put up a good front. I think the goal is to actually feel the sense of calm and peace and hope, even in the midst of all of this happening around us. And it's a struggle, and it's not that it's like a steady state that will hold. It's like, oh, I'm going to meditate this morning, I'm good this week. That's not the way it works. It's like a constant tending. It's like stirring, a pot of food so that it doesn't burn at the bottom of the pot. You have to keep stirring. But the more we can sort of sort through our emotions and function and nurture, starting from within the home, as we're talking about, but then outward. And what does that look like? That starts with perhaps estranged family members, estranged friends. I reached out to a friend the other day. I thought, maybe had I done something, because she hadn't answered my last maybe 3 texts, but people are just going through stuff. So I had sort of created this imaginary strife when in fact I just needed to keep, the launch is happening. So we'll talk about that because Octavia wrote in Parable of the Sower that our destiny is in the stars. It's one of the Earthseed parables. So
she called us Earthseed, but wasn't quite sure that Earth was going to be the place we would grow.
true. And so now SpaceX, which is a private aeronautical company, is having a launch today. Which right now, which we do want to acknowledge. We appreciate you being here instead of watching that.
But it seems so Butler-esque, right? I mean, not that it costs $2 million to go, but to say we've got to really look at some alternate places, like where, even she was saying geographically, she wasn't quite sure of the Earth, maybe not the city you're in, the community you're in, but she's like, what we're doing now is not working, right? So we have got to find, a place. I mean, she was also talking about a way, right? A way of being, a way of living, but she did not forget a place.
Right.
I mean, you live in Southern California, and there are moments, even without the political dimensions, where it feels like it's burning around you.
True.
And she's like, let's go to North.
Wildfire season hasn't even started yet.
It's a season though, right? I mean, and I've lived there. People say, you don't have seasons. I'm like, sure, we have Santa Ana wind season, we have fire season, we have 4 days of rain season, right? There are, but it's a season. Fire is a season. And even Lauren was like, let's walk north, people. Like we've got to go somewhere.
And I want to harken back to what you said earlier about how we can sort of rethink the way we're living in the face of pandemic. Once restrictions lift and it's safer to travel or safer to think about moving, they say that moving is along the level of the grief of losing someone. It's a kind of a death when you leave your space, even a space, frankly, you don't like that much, but it's yours, it's familiar, it's home. But maybe over this pandemic, we have learned that we're too isolated, or maybe you've lost a job. That was the reason you moved here in the first place, and the rents are too high to sustain under what the new income models would be. There are many, many, many reasons that we might think about physical transitions right now. And I think the space journey is a good metaphor for that, because I frankly have no personal desire to go to space. And I know for a fact I would not be able to afford a ticket in my lifetime. So it's not a priority in any way, shape, or form. But what does destiny being in the stars mean to us in a real life, real world aspect? Living in a less expensive place, moving up plans to move that aging parent in your home, no matter how independent minded they are, but making it attractive. It's like, this could be an adventure for all of you. It's not just that they're moving out of their space. You might also be moving out of your space. So there's a more equal distribution of disruption with the goal of creating a shared living environment, or maybe adult siblings, might want to actually start sharing a space. Let's rethink, what does it mean where we're living? Are we in a place where we can plant seeds to thrive and grow?
And it's, this is something that, Black people have done since being in this country. Like we out, right? Like using the shirts with Harriet Tubman, but, from Garvey on, like maybe we need to go somewhere else, right? And it's a sense that we know this isn't working. We know we're not free here. And the thirst is the right thirst, I think. It's the right craving to say we need to do something different, whatever that different is.
And also it's important to note, some of you may be thinking, oh, how am I going to do that because of this, because of this, because of this? It's okay. It's obviously there are obstacles to any plan for change, but it's very, very important to first admit to yourself, tell yourself, or embrace the idea that you want this thing to happen. I would say for me, it's very powerful to write things down as goals, right? So forget about New Year's resolutions. We're talking about Earthseed resolutions, right? So what is the dream plan you have for creating stability and peace in your own life, so that you will have the energy to extend outward, both to people in your circle, and then we can start talking about the community, right? Because one of the lessons I took from the civil rights era and talking to my parents and their friends is that burnout, you know, look at those people out there protesting right now and imagine the stress and toll it takes on the body to actually face, if not violence from police, then the threat of violence from police. The courage just boggles my mind. I'm a scaredy cat. My mom told me she went to jail so I wouldn't have to, and I have taken that to heart. Although I do acknowledge that at some point as a Black woman, I may find myself in that very situation because I am moved to that point, and there, you know, I just had to go. I just had to be there. I'm at the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever. As a Black woman, I feel like there's almost an inevitability to arrest and going to jail, which I have thus far been able to avoid. But yeah, write it down. Write down what your goal is for your personal peace. Write down what your goal is in terms of, are you living in the right place? And where would you rather be living? And then that gives not only your mind permission to use your imagination, but also writing down a goal is only the first step. The biggest part is those active, concrete steps you take toward your goal, but you have to know the goal before you can take steps toward it.
Yeah, you know, and what you're saying about that is, it reminds me how, can I say radical or revolutionary?
Yes.
Hopefully not too strong a word. How radical it is to even envision something different. Right.
Yes.
I mean, so your goal is like your steps and your like where you want to end up, but to dream another world. Right? I mean, this is what Langston Hughes is always writing about, right? To dream of another reality, another world, another way of being, another way of organizing your life, your work, your family. It's a big deal. Like, right, you know, I mean, this is what so many of our ancestors did. They tried to imagine something better than what they had and then try to work to make it happen for their children. And it's hard to dream right now. I think it's hard. I mean, for me, it is, right? It's hard to, I mean, first of all, when is your house silent to do it? At least you know how my household is. And, or if you do have the time, you know, to sit down and write and not feel utterly discouraged, right? To not feel like you're spinning out in the bad way with all that's around you. And so I think it's like everything else we've talked about, right? Like your meditation, your breathing, the yoga, the whatever you do, the dance, the musical instrument, with the walk, it's a practice. I think we have to practice dreaming, right? Like it has to be a thing we do. You know, when I was a kid, I used to daydream, like it was my job. Right? Like I'd lay on my back and think about whatever. And so I think, you know, even to get that practice of daydreaming, of dreaming, of envisioning, you know, if there were no barriers, what would it look like? If, you know, there was nothing standing in my way or in our way, what would, you know, and writing that down, you know, and then dreaming it and writing it, because there's something about getting it down, as you're saying.
Writing it down, I have always considered writing goals down to be an act of magic. As a writer, it's not surprising that I would feel that way, but I do think there is something to it. And I think I think unconsciously we know it's an act of magic. And I used to sort of argue with Steve about this. He's all about lists and goals and all this kind of thing. And I was more reluctant often to write things down because I was afraid of a time 6 months down the line when I would look at those goals and they would seem so lofty and out of reach and I would just feel disappointment. So isn't that silly sometimes, the way we won't even allow ourselves to dream and allow ourselves to have the goals because we're afraid we will disappoint ourselves down the line. So what? Yeah. So what if 6 months down the line, you haven't accomplished it? It can be a reminder, I'm not taking my concrete steps toward this goal. No wonder I haven't made any progress. Or very often a job will stand in the way, which is ironic, given how corporations and businesses are so quick to cut us loose. Sometimes we're feeling all sorts of loyalty on a personal sort of family level to a work environment and institution that, trust me, will not give a dang about cutting us loose the minute things go, you know. So that's in our heads. That sense of loyalty is in our heads. So that word radical, I think, applies. Sometimes it's radical just to imagine a different job.
And, you know, sometimes the thing I feel about writing it down, and I don't think it's a rational fear, right? But I feel like, well, if I look at it and I'm not doing it, if I write it down and I see I'm not doing it, then it makes me feel like more of a failure than if I had kept it to myself. Or I feel like, in the Zaki Shange, someone's going to run off with all of my stuff, right? Like, if they could see my stuff, they'll take it. And I'm sure I could, analyze myself and figure out where that comes from. But that's one of my barriers sometimes in writing it down, right? And experiences I've had. Like, if I write it down, then other people will know my secrets or know my dreams, and I have to keep them to myself and surprise people with them, right? And I can think of all the learned behaviors I've gotten this from in institutions working in that have created this. But to say, no, you can't live your life like that. Not your interior life, at least, not your home life like that. You have to I can't have the guard up around me to say, yeah, write it down, right? What do we hope for?
And within that, of course, a lot of people are facing a situation where they're having to come up with a new plan, not because it's a dream, but because it's a reality. I can't afford this lease. I can't afford this car payment. My job has dried up, whatever those reasons are. So having your own goals in the face of that kind of disappointment is a way of taking control of the situation. Early on, this is just an analogy, as a hypochondriac, when I was convincing myself on a regular basis that my temperature was too high or that my dry throat was because I was coming down with COVID-19, that whatever it was, no matter how minor, on a regular basis, I was convinced I had symptoms. And the first step for me managing that was to begin to clean up and disinfect things. And I found that when I took even a small action, like wiping this faucet down, wiping this refrigerator handle down, so in my head, so I don't infect anyone, right? Made me feel better, made me feel calmer. It's not like if I had COVID-19, I would lose complete control of everything, if that did happen, and some of you may have had it and may still be suffering from symptoms. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible disease, and it lingers. But unless you're a patient on a ventilator or someone who passes away, you recover, right? So even the worst case scenario is not necessarily the worst case scenario, but when I'm at the beginning of that imaginative process of all the terrible things that could happen, picking up a wipe, washing my hands, safeguarding my environment for my family always made me feel better. And to expand upon that analogy, helping other people will help you feel better. I tweeted this week that I had a student who asked for an extension on her final paper because she didn't have a laptop and she'd been writing it on her phone. And it got a ton of engagement, people sharing their similar stories, public school teachers sharing their similar experiences. I had about 3 people privately DM me and say, hey, I can send your student a laptop, or I'm not really using my Chromebook, I can send it to your student. Not rich people, none of the celebrities, by the way, who follow me. It was all just ordinary people who would have been making sacrifices to try to help somebody else. And I grant that is a generous impulse, but also for them, they all said, I'm paying it forward. Somebody help me. I want to help somebody else. And that helps us feel better. So no matter how much we may be in crisis ourselves, when we're feeling that anxiousness, when we're feeling that paranoia, when we're feeling that hopelessness, doing things for others, no matter how small, and others can be broad. It can mean your child, just spending time to actually enjoy your child's smile instead of just hearing chatter, 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 chatter. Under lockdown, it could be tough, but to really sit and realize this kid is not going to be, my son's case, 16 forever, right? Let me sit with this moment, or helping a stranger, and whatever's $5 to a bail fund. There are so many ways that helping other people can help decrease our anxiety and give us more freedom and focus to work on those goals and creating self-guidance and agency.
And they're all part of the revolution, right? Like, some people are the protesters and some people are I give to the funds, right, to support, or I check in on people, or, right, I think it reminds us that there's not just one way leadership looks, right, and not just one way that the protesting looks. And we can all find a place, however small, but it's not small, right? Because you need all of those. You need all the parts working together. You know, I often tell my daughter, like, this house is an ecosystem, right? And that's why everyone has to do their part. I'm like, it's a delicate ecosystem. If one person drops their ball, the whole thing it will come crashing. And she's a science kid, so she really understands that language. But I'm like, you know what? It is an ecosystem. You know, I said it out of frustration one day, trying to help her understand why she had to clean up her area. But it was really like, yeah, we, you know, even our households, right? Our networks, our group of friends, like we are interdependent. And
Right.
so even extending that kindness when you don't have to, you know, kindness eases change is an earthly
Yes.
verse,
Yes.
right? Being kind when you don't have to be, right?
True.
Like that is also part of what we do.
It is, absolutely. I want to go to, I think we can start doing some questions now, right?
Well, we're near the end, but
Oh, near the
I mean,
end.
I've been checking the questions.
Really quickly, there was one, and this just directly relates to what you were just saying. There was a question about how to work through family and friends who are in the revolutionary stage and others who'd like to take a more careful approach so that there's a sense of unity. I mean, the good news, speaking to what Monica was just saying, is that I learned this from my parents and their civil rights era, is that, as I said earlier, not everybody had to be at that revolutionary stage. It takes a lot of courage to go out now and protest. And my hat's off to those people. Please be careful if you're doing it. But I don't expect anyone to be doing that during a pandemic, especially. So what other forms and tactics can you use if a family member if you find you're spending all your time arguing with somebody about, you know, fires and burning down your own community? I mean, you can point out that a lot of this violence seems to be happening at the hand of people who are actually wearing similar clothing and seem to be organized and chaos agents, you know, and there's a difference between people who are protesting and people who are just trying to create chaos. So don't put them all in the same category. Don't judge someone who's just angry and frustrated. I mean, you've got assembly people, you've got elected officials out there, law school deans out there. We can't put them all in the same category, you know, as disruptors in a negative way. When something isn't working, it needs to be disrupted, all right? But you don't have to be on the same page with everyone in your circle. Even if you're working within an organization that's having a disagreement about tactics, sometimes it's possible for some members of your group to do one approach and other members of your group to do another approach, and it's okay that you disagree. Disagreement is always a part of organizational politics. And it's the thing that my parents talked about it between different organizations, the NAACP, the SCLC, you know, everybody had different approaches and different goals, short term, but long term, we all want the same thing. We want this to work better. We want to not to be afraid that our teenage children or we ourselves will be harmed or shot by a police officer, and that there is no recourse, that we have a right to survive and thrive, right? And I think we all agree on that. So start with what you all see in common, and then the tactics can differ. That's fine too. So did you want to talk a little bit then, Monica, about our surprise?
Yeah. You know, we took a week off. It was Memorial Day for some, day not to have to remote learn your child for me. And to give us a chance to really think about how we could be more interactive, right? We have more questions than we can get to most of the time. And we're, you know, and how to continue this in ways that wouldn't burn us out, but would still bring joy, because we do this because we're having a good time with it.
Right. I feel lighter having had this talk. I hope you do too.
Yeah.
But we were, you know, we started with a text message, as we pointed out in earlier webinars, and we really only thought we'd be doing the one webinar, one and out. But somehow we got on a weekly schedule, and we had these great guests, Toshi Rakem coming in, and John Giddings and Yana Jemison. And we can't promise the date, but we have an upcoming guest. Should we talk about our upcoming guest?
Talk about our upcoming guest, and we'll talk about our thing.
Adrienne Marie Brown is going to appear on this free webinar to talk about emergent strategy, and she's just brilliant. If you don't know who she is, look her up. It's Adrienne, Adrienne Marie Brown, just a brilliant motivator and thinker. Toshi Reagan mentioned that Regan, I always say her name wrong. Toshi Regan mentioned that she and Adrienne are going to be doing a Parable of the Sower podcast. So this is, if you like Toshi, then trust me, you will love Adrienne, and she's going to come and bless us with her time. Sometime this month we will tell you.
No, it's still May. It's still May.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sometime in June. Right. It's still May. So we'll tell you that date, but we are going to
can we also talk about our other upcoming guest?
Yes, because we're shifting our formatting. We're not going to be able to keep doing weekly webinars. So that's sort of the bad news, but we have something good to go with that.
Right. So I would mention, should I mention our other guests? Yes, let's mention other guests. All right. And so we're beginning to plan out where we can't tell you when yet, but we know how to reach you. We'll blast it everywhere. Nisi Shaw will also be another one of our guests. And yes. So we get a lot of questions about Afrofuturism, and we don't always have a chance to get to them, even though we try to weave it in. I mean, besides having Tananarive here as our Afrofuturist, Nisi Shaw will come and we can chat even more about Afrofuturism. And
she knew Octavia. She was a friend of Octavia's, so she can speak to that. And she also teaches a course called Writing the Other. So those of you who are artists, we can all get a little more down and dirty with the art part.
But we've actually decided to put together a workshop for us to continue conversations. So for ways that we can actually be more interactive during our time together, create some online community, both on the webinar and in another space outside of the webinar, do some journaling together, actually, since a lot of us are really interested in writing. And even if it's just to document where we are right now, as well as, the next great novel, anywhere in between.
Like to be.
And so I think, I know Dr. Coleman Clay, our public scholarship technology consultant, has some things to put up about that, but that will be coming soon.
Yes, so that will supplement. This will be our free webinar, which we will continue to do as long as we can with guests, and we'll do that at least once a month. But if you'd like more than once a month interaction with us, we do have what we call, well, I won't say the title until the card is up, but we have a workshop that will have a fee, but not too expensive. We tried to come up with a price that we felt that people would be able to afford, that would enable you to have that extra interaction with us, more intimate interaction with us, and
some additional resources.
And we call it, well, if the card's not,
let's say what it is. Yeah,
it's called
Saving
Ourselves.
The Shaping Change workshop.
We said it together. It was so funny. But yeah, Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change workshop. And we have not launched the page quite yet. We're pulling some of the elements together. But if you want to be one of the first people to hear about when it's ready, if you're like, oh yes, that sounds amazing, let's go, because we'll be starting up in the next couple or so weeks, then just go to www.octaviawebinar.com, www.octaviawebinar.com. That will put you on the list, so you will hear first when we are ready to go with that class, that workshop.
So it's a great time to ask Clay if he can pull
up.
There we go.
Okay, so that's my Afrofuturism webinar. I do an Afrofuturism webinar with co-hosted with Stephen Barnes, who you saw in our last webinar here. And that's at www.afrofuturismwebinar.com. That is a 10-week digital download, take it at your own pace course, where we not only look at the work of Octavia Butler, but all kinds of Afrofuturism from the musical realm, from the film realm. So it's Janelle Monáe, it's George Clinton, it's a little bit of Black Panther thrown in there, but also lesser known Afrofuturistic works that predated Black Panther by independent artists, and all kinds of stuff to help you understand how we can imagine ourselves thriving in the future while still embracing our past.
Awesome, thank you. Before I pulled up the slide with the joint webinar with the conversation with you both, I wanted to give Dr. Coleman a chance to talk about the work that she's doing with her process theology.
Right, so it's our fancy philosophical term for earthseed. In many ways it is. When I started learning about process theology, I was like, this sounds just like earthseed. I wonder if anyone thought about that. And so I have based my academic career on talking about a theology of change, and I'm excited about sharing that with more people. So we're launching in mid-June, June 22nd, and you can learn more about that at processtheology101.com.
Awesome, thank you. And I also wanted to give Dr. Coleman or Tananarive Due a chance to talk about the calls for support that audience members have asked to share with us.
Yeah, well, we've said before that this is something we offer. It's a gift to us. It's a gift to everyone, anyone who's interested. But if you do want to support it, this is how you can do it. We've had people ask us how they can support it financially in some way. So you can feel free to do that at webinardonate.com, on Venmo at Monica-A-Coleman, or at Cash App $Rev Dr. Monica.
Reverend Dr. Monica. I love that. I love that.
And last but not least, I wanted to circle back around to the conversation that you both were having about that webinar series that's coming up here. And this is the web address down at the bottom, octaviawebinar.com.
Yeah, that's going to be our supplement to these free webinars. So basically you would be getting interaction with us roughly every other week. If you sign up to join us for the workshop, it'll be smaller and more intimate with more actual interaction with you. We're doing our best with the type questions, but this will be a more intimate setting. And there's also a support program around it in terms of a community site together and journaling and just more communing as we face these times and try to develop the resources to save ourselves. So it's Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change workshop with Monica A. Coleman and Tananarive Due, where you can get more information at www.octaviawebinar.com.
Awesome. I will speak as a person in the audience for saying that this has been a rich conversation. I'll be digesting the wonderful insights and feedback and wisdom that you both have provided for people who are here. And I also wanted to give a shout out to people who are interacting on Twitter using the hashtag #OctaviaTried. Please continue to use that hashtag going forward, having conversations about the work that Octavia has been doing and connected to the other work too.
Great. Check out YouTube for the Octavia Tried webinar series that are already on display on Monica Coleman's page. If you've missed our previous webinars, if you just type in Octavia Tried, they will pop up. There have been 3 prior to today, so don't miss any of them. They're all different and we hope special and helpful in their own way. We will let you know via social media and email, if those of you who have signed up for our list, when we have our next webinar, and definitely can't wait to tell you when we book that date for Adrienne Marie Brown.
Definitely. Well, again, thank you for spending this hour a little bit more with us. We appreciate it. And I hope you feel a little bit slightly more saved, that you feel a little bit more like there's a way to step in the right direction.
You're certainly not alone with your anxieties. You're certainly not alone with the very deep emotions that all of us are experiencing as we watch history repeat and repeat and repeat, and seemingly no end in sight. But there is an end in sight, and we can help plant the seeds to create that, in both for our personal lives and for those around us. Everyone have a great weekend. If you're going out to a protest, please stay safe. Wear the mask. Exercise social distancing, stay far away from police officers. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Have a great weekend.